Windows 10 or Windows 11, which is the better OS? This has been an ongoing debate ever since Windows 11 was released. And in today's video, we are going with a very different comparison where we are testing the actual real input delay on various tasks that you would do on your typical desktop workings. Now, there's also some gaming results thrown in today's video, which one of the gaming tests that we did is very enlightening, where in particular Windows 10 will be ever so slightly faster in terms of input latency compared to Windows 11. Now, keep in mind, I'll pull up today's system specifications on the screen for you guys, where the only difference in today's video is simply Windows 10 and Windows 11. We are using the exact same hardware, even the SSD itself, which I did a perfect clone and then updated to Windows 11. So with the first test out of the way, let's get on now to some gaming load times here, where we tested out two different games, which will show you the Apex Legends virtually showed no difference in the load times here, both coming in at 15 seconds a piece. And then moving on to CSGO, however, this booted up a lot faster on Windows 10. Now back to that input latency, you may have noticed that it was running slightly better on Windows 10. Now in terms of why this is exactly, I'm going to be making a follow-up video testing before and after settings for input latency itself on the Windows desktop machines. I have come into some preliminary results here, but I will have the numbers out next month. So do stay tuned for that video if you want to see it. But let's continue on with some more benchmarks here, especially on the desktop itself when it comes to input latency. And here is where, just like CSGO, Windows 10 performs ever so slightly better in terms of raw input delay. So what does all this mean up until this point in time? Well, basically Windows 10 is ever so slightly more responsive than Windows 11. Now, if you're doing work, not just gaming, this can add up with every single action you do, saving you those milliseconds, which over time can definitely add up and make you more productive if you were to use Windows 10 over Windows 11. So maybe if you're a boss, you'd want to deploy Windows 10 on your office PCs in your work, but maybe if you're an employee, you might want to use Windows 11. Though jokes aside, we'll get into some more juicy tests right after today's video sponsor, which comes from VIP SCD Keys, and they are offering Windows 10 and Windows 11 licenses at significantly discounted prices. If you use the link in the description below and then use the coupon code BFTYC, you can get rid of that annoying Windows needs activation message in the bottom right hand corner, as well as open up more features on Windows 10 and Windows 11. And the best thing is, it only costs around $15 after you use that coupon code BFTYC. Now they've also got Microsoft Office, which I personally use Office 2016 as it doesn't need a recurring activation, and I can use that coupon BFTYC and save myself a lot of money there too. I've been using them for years and they've never let me down. Links in the description below. So the next test we are going to show you guys now is opening the file location from the search bar. Now the search results were pretty much identical here when I was searching for a file itself on this 10th gen 10850K CPU. However, opening this file location did present a slight difference here on Windows 10 versus Windows 11. And it was actually in favor of Windows 10, where you can see up on the footage on your screen here that a lot of the times Windows 11 will be working on it when it comes to finding not just an MP3 file, but also MP4 files, which we did a test over 10 different runs on both these OSs, and I found that Windows 10 was saving you a little bit of time. Now, keep in mind, I have slowed this video footage down to show you the differences here. But again, if you've been doing some soul searching, looking deep within yourself, you want the best snap, Windows 10 gets the victory here too. Though another win here for Windows 10 comes from dragging and dropping 5 big video files into Premiere Pro and then seeing the delay until those files are initiated in the timeline on our project. And here's where Windows 10 1 by 1 frame when we were filming at 120 FPS. So it's not a big difference here, but it is still a difference, especially when you couple it in with all those other previous wins. Though speaking of Adobe Premiere Pro, whilst I was in this video editing software, I decided to get the 1000 FPS camera out again and do what was called a stop-start recognition test, where if I press spacebar on my keyboard, I can then see after I've initiated that press, which a lot of people do criticize me for it being not scientific, where we don't have an LED light to tell us when the key's actuated. But if I'm slamming that key hard enough, which you can see my finger actually, this is probably the reason my fingers have been pretty sore lately, is you can see that I'm hitting the keyboard so hard. In one of the shots, the keyboard's actually bouncing off the table. If I'm hitting it so fast, that actuation is going to happen pretty much in 1 millisecond. And here's where we found with the difference between Windows 11 and Windows 10 was it wasn't so much the initiation, that's pressing it to start the playback, it was when we stopped the playback that Windows 10 scored a victory here. It was actually quite surprising, but again, it's just those little actions that add up over everything over your OS that makes the experience better on Windows 10. Then moving on to DPC latency, here's where we had Windows 10, 145 microseconds versus 175 on Windows 11. This was done after the desktop was idle, and we tested this after 1 minute. Though speaking of idling, here is where Windows 10 actually lost to Windows 11 in terms of lower power consumption. We're getting around 39.5 versus 42.5. So there is a 3-watt difference when the system is on high performance mode in Windows 11 versus high performance mode in Windows 10. Though throwing up another win for Windows 11 was when we opened up Edge browser with 10 YouTube tabs loaded up into that browser, which would initiate the screen fast enough in terms of actual content, and that was Windows 11. Though with those tests all finished, it's time to close off this video with some classical benchmarks. And this is the Windows 10 versus Windows 11 boot times. And here's where Windows 10 scores a victory here at 25 seconds versus 37 seconds on Windows 11. Now you may be wondering, what's the big discrepancy here? Well, Windows 11 requires two things that Windows 10 doesn't require, and that is the Trusted Platform Module, or TPM 2.0. In this case on Intel, you have to enable Intel Trusted Platform in the BIOS, as well as the Secure Boot setting. Now when it comes to FPS in games, here is where we did a benchmark on CSGO, and we actually found that the FPS was higher on Windows 10 in this particular benchmark, meaning if anything, there would be slightly less CPU overhead on Windows 10 even whilst you were gaming versus Windows 11. Now we did test out Apex Legends after this too, however there was virtually no difference between these two OSs in this particular title. Though with those numbers out of the way, it's now time to give you guys a conclusion on Windows 11 versus Windows 10. Recently I've backtracked to Windows 10 because I've just been focusing on my quality of life. It may sound a little bit weird, but we do weird at Tech Yes City, don't worry. And I do all these explanations that I think, I don't know, a lot of people lately want to hear. So for me, lately, I've been wanting to get back to a place before 2020. And that involved me using Windows 10. It involved me using a particular set of hardware that I just remember was so blazingly fast when I was doing my video editing. Then all that stuff happened after 2020, and then I had to move to Japan. And in between all that, I just didn't get time to properly focus on my hardware that I was using. But it wasn't until recently that things have calmed down a little bit that I've had time to focus on this stuff and say, hey, I remember that was faster, that was better. Even though in the tech space we've been getting served up better hardware and better software, I don't believe that's the case. And so these tests here today show that although Windows 11 did score a victory in power consumption slightly, and also the Edge browser times, when it came to the desktop experience and doing a lot of actions per minute, this is where Windows 10 is a better OS for me personally. And so for me doing these tests here today, it's validating something that was in the back of my head that I subjectively noticed, and then I'm actually doing the testing here and I'm finding out some big differences. Though in terms of the biggest differences for input lag, we are going to make a video on that next month. I'm doing some more testing with certain settings on versus off. I've already found, as I said before, some great preliminary results here, so do stay tuned for that video. So what you need to do from these tests here today is, what's the better OS for you? Do you need a better looking OS? Well, that's going to be Windows 11. Do you need more snappy, more responsive OS? That's going to be Windows 10. But on that same time, I do believe Windows 11 has better HDR support too. So there are some reasons to go with either of the two here, but for me personally, I want to have the best user experience in terms of snappiness, so I'm going with Windows 10. However, if you want to find out more between the differences on these OSs, I'll put a link to another video right up here so you can watch that and see more of these differences before you settle on which OS is best for you. Anyhow, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button and also let us know in the comments section below, what OS are you using and why. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And with that aside, we've got the question of the day here, which comes from Sky Lusacious 8463, and they ask, what does he mean at 6 minutes and 1 second? Apples to apples to apples. And this is in a different video where we were talking about air coolers, but when I'm talking about apples to apples or even apples to apples to apples, it means that everything is the same. All the external variables are the same in the tests, but the actual products themselves. So for instance, today, the test was apples to apples, and that all the hardware was the same except just Windows 10 versus Windows 11. All the settings I had from Windows 10 were there because I just upgraded the OS to Windows 11. So therefore that made this whole test really apples to apples. Another example would be if we're testing out two different CPUs, say for instance a 7950X versus a 13900K. However, we tested the 13900K at 20 degrees versus the 7950X at 35 degrees, that would then be apples to oranges. So we have to make sure when we're doing testing for you guys and getting your results, we have to make sure everything is apples to apples. So hopefully that answers that question. And with that aside, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. If you stayed this far, also be sure to check out that link in the description below. Big thanks to VIPS CD Keys for making this video possible, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.